When you think of George Orwell's 1984, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's a terrifying prophecy, right? A warning about some dark, dystopian future. But what if we've been reading it all wrong? What if the book isn't really about the future at all, but about the past?
So let's just ask this right up front. Is 1984 a prediction, or is it a memory? I mean, think about that for a second. What if it's not a crystal ball, but a mirror, reflecting a world that was already very, very real? Answering that one question, well, it changes absolutely everything about this story.
To figure this out, we're going to need a special kind of tool. Think of it like a key that's going to let us unlock the secret history that Orwell literally packed into every single page of this novel.
And that key has a name. It's called New Historicism. Now, it sounds a little academic, but the idea is actually super simple. It's just that a story isn't created in a vacuum, It's an artifact, a product of the exact time and place it was written. So when we look at 1984 through this lens, it stops being this futuristic sci-fi, and it starts looking a lot more like a diary, a really, really chilling diary of the world as it was in 1940.
So where did Orwell get the ideas for this awful place, Oceania? Well, he didn't have to look far. The blueprint came straight from one place, the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin.
Let's start with the big one, literally, Big Brother. The guy on all the posters, the all-seeing, mustachioed leader. He's just a made-up character, a symbol, right? Well, not quite.
Just take a look at this. The way Orwell describes Big Brother, the black hair, the mustache, that intense gaze, it's practically a portrait of Joseph Stalin. But it goes way deeper than just looks. That whole cult of personality, the way everyone is forced to basically worship him like a god? That was lifted wholesale from the real-life deification of Stalin in the USSR.
Okay, so if you have a godlike leader, you also need a devil. Every totalitarian state needs that ultimate villain, right? A scapegoat for everyone to pour their fear and hatred into. And in Oceania, that person is Emanuel Goldstein, the #1 enemy of the people.
And surprise, surprise, Goldstein wasn't pulled out of thin air either. He is a dead ringer for Leon Trotsky, who was Stalin's main political rival. I mean, the parallels are uncanny. Trotsky was a former party leader, just like Goldstein. He was exiled, just like Goldstein. And he was turned into this monstrous figure in Soviet propaganda, the source of all treason and evil. It's a one-to-one match.
Now, one of the most terrifying things in the book is how the party controls history. Think about it. Winston's whole job, his 9 to 5, is to literally erase the past and write a new one. People become unpersons and just vanish from photos. We see those former leaders, Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, paraded out to confess to these crazy crimes they obviously didn't commit.
And here's the kicker. This was not science fiction. This was just Soviet policy. The state routinely airbrushed disgraced officials out of official photographs. It was a real thing. And those forced confessions? That's a direct reflection of the infamous Moscow show trials in the 1930s, where old Bolsheviks were forced to confess to being traitors. Orwell was just reporting.
Okay, this next one is one of the most famous lines from any book ever. Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4. It's Winston's last stand for reality, for objective truth. But where did Orwell get that bizarre idea of the party insisting that 2 + 2 = 5? It seems so random, so perfectly absurd. But he didn't invent it.
This is going to blow your mind. It was a real slogan. 2 + 2 = 5 was actual Soviet propaganda. They used it to motivate people to complete the national 5-year economic plan in just 4 years. Get it? 2 + 2 = 5? Orwell saw this piece of real-world absurdity and realized it was the perfect metaphor for a regime that wants to control reality itself.
So, the Soviet Union was clearly the main blueprint, but it wasn't the only one. Orwell was a keen observer of his time, and he saw that while the political structure of Oceania was very Soviet, the style, the aesthetic of its control, that had echoes of another totalitarian power, Nazi Germany.
Let's talk about the 2 minutes hate. You remember this scene, right? That daily ritual where everyone gathers, the screen flashes with the face of the enemy, and they are all just whipped into this absolute frenzy of screaming, raw hatred.
Well, that whole spectacle was directly inspired by the meticulously staged mass rallies in Nazi Germany. Think of the Nuremberg rallies. They were designed for the exact same purpose, to short-circuit rational thought and unite a massive crowd in pure emotional fervor against a common enemy. It's the same playbook, the same psychological manipulation.
And then there are the children.
It's one of the creepiest parts of the book. The kids in 1984 are basically weaponized. They're part of this group called the Junior Spies, and they are absolutely fanatical, trained to be more loyal to the party than to their own parents. They're even encouraged to turn them in for thought crime.
Again, the real-world parallel here is impossible to miss. The Hitler Youth. That was a real organization in Nazi Germany that indoctrinated kids to believe their first and only loyalty was to the state, to the Führer. Loyalty to the regime came before family, before religion, before anything. The goal was to break the family bond and replace it with loyalty to the party.
Okay, so we've got the political structure from the Soviets and the propaganda style from the Nazis. But what about the setting? The physical world of 1984. That gritty, grimy, crumbling London. You might think that was Orwell imagining some awful future, but it wasn't. For him, it was just 1948. It was the world right outside his window. I mean, look at these details from the book. The constant rationing, the fact that nobody can get enough chocolate or razor blades, that was just life in post-war Britain. That awful Victory gin Winston drinks, that was a real cheap gin you could buy back then. The rotting 19th century houses and the fear of rocket bombs, that's just a perfect description of London after the Blitz. It's not sci-fi, folks, it's historical reporting. So, when you start putting all these puzzle pieces together, a new picture of 1984 emerges. You take the Soviet political machine, you add the Nazi style of propaganda, and you place it all in the grim, gritty reality of post-war London. You realize Orwell didn't invent this world from scratch. He assembled it.
This chart really says it all, doesn't it? The Stalin-Trotsky conflict becomes Big Brother versus Goldstein. The Moscow purges become the show trials in the book. The Hitler Youth becomes the Junior Spies. The London Blitz becomes the rocket bombs. It's all there. Orwell was like a master chef who took the most toxic ingredients of his time and combined them into one perfectly horrifying creation.
So what's the big takeaway here? Why does this all matter? Does knowing this make the book any less powerful? I'd argue it makes it more powerful, way more terrifying, because it proves that the horrors in 1984 aren't some distant sci-fi fantasy, they are real. They're based on a blueprint of things that have already happened. It shifts the book from being a warning of what could be to a stark reminder of what was and a lesson about what we can never, ever allow to happen again.
And that really leaves us with one final, pretty heavy question to think about. If Orwell's world of 1948 is so clearly hiding in plain sight within his story, what parts of our world, right now, are being secretly woven into the stories we're all watching and reading today? When people look back at our time, what history are they going to find hidden in our art?